Welcome to the GenAI podcast, where the future meets fun and tech talk trends. Get ready to dive into the world of artificial intelligence like never before. Your hosts, Dale, Alan, Greg, and Val, are about to take you on a wild ride through the AI universe. So, buckle up, tune in, and let the AI adventure begin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special episode of the Gen AI podcast. I wanted to say, we interrupt this broadcast to bring you some breaking news, but didn't quite roll off the tongue. But it sounded good in my head.
We should do like a scrolling ticker edit with news and everything.
Like a world thing near Bob circling or something.
Breaking news.
Breaking news. Is it breaking news though? Because we've hopped onto a impromptu episode because it seems like the world is blowing up with DeepSeek, and we thought let's hop on and share our views and maybe try and clarify and demystify some of the treacle that people are trying to wade through. But let's start with what DeepSeek exactly is, because there are probably some that haven't heard of it. And if they haven't heard of it, maybe they've been living under a rock. If you have been living under a rock, thank you for listening to us under that rock. But what is DeepSeek and why is it making the news?
Yeah, we reach further than everybody else. So if you haven't heard of DeepSeek anywhere else, you're going to hear it from us. So yeah, let's start from the top. There's a lot to unpack. And maybe as a spoiler, there will be a lot to unpack about journalism as well, and spreading of information and social media, etc., etc. So brace yourselves in. Let's start with what's DeepSeek. So I'm going to start from the top. There's a hedge fund in China. Allegedly assets under management of about $7 billion, which in terms of hedge fund size is actually pretty tiny. But hedge funds are kind of like a frowned upon thing in mainland China. So what they did a couple of years ago is they spun off, created, I don't actually know about the corporate structure of all of this, a research team. And they figured, why don't we do some research in generative AI? Great idea. They have about 150, 200 researchers now, something like that. And they started releasing a lot of models and they published a lot of papers. They decided that they were going to publish everything as open research, which is great. Right? It's great for the community. And open source and open research are really those tides that lift all boats. Kind of like, when a new version of Llama gets released, it's a little bit less open source than what DeepSeek are actually doing. But it's still very good because everybody can read what they've done and they can take those techniques and apply them to their own models and their own agents, whatever else they're doing. So there was a DeepSeek V1 model, there was a DeepSeek V2 model, and there was a DeepSeek V3 model. So these three models are large language models. So think of them as another version of GPT-4o. And I'm specifically saying 4o because 4o is a language model. It's a base LLM. You can use it for all the things that you would use normally. And V3, I want to get this right, but I'm not entirely sure. The paper for V3 with all the benchmarks was released December, some point, right? So we're talking roughly a month ago. And then they released a new model called R1. And R1 is a different model because it's not a large language model. It's a reasoning model. And it basically uses the same or similar techniques as O1. Now, the way that they built R1 is what I suspect is pretty much exactly the same thing that OpenAI did to R1 is exactly what I suspect OpenAI did to build O1. I'm going to have to flip-flopping between O1 and R1. I'm going to get those two confused. So apologies in advance. Which is they took V3 and they trained it on a different data set. This is a very common thing to do. In fact, pretty much all GenAI models and large language models nowadays are trained on multiple data sets in various sequences, and you have lots of ways of combining them. And they came out with R1, which is a reasoning model, and it has chain of thought built in, and they published everything. And what the media latched onto is something that I actually think is possibly factually incorrect, but even if we take it at face value, it is not what the media are concluding from it. So I'll quote directly, and like the media have latched onto this, which is actually on the V3 paper, not the R1 paper. And you can see like how everybody's conflating everything into one DeepSeek, but there's at least 7 models that we need to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
But V3 is the large language model on which they based a lot of other things now. Anyway, quoting directly from the paper, lastly, we emphasize the economical training costs of DeepSeek V3, summarized in Table 1, achieved through optimized co-design of algorithms, frameworks, and hardware. So what they did, during the pre-training stage, DeepSeek V3 was trained on 180,000 H800, which is the limited version of an H100 GPU. H100 GPU is the state-of-the-art GPU that's available now. The H800 GPU is the version of the H100 that was released for China after the sanctions on chips. So they pre-trained on 180,000 GPU hours using a cluster of 2,048 GPUs. Then they continued training for 2.6 million GPU hours. And then they did some more training for 120,000 GPU hours. I'm kind of like reading through the paper now for context length extension. So what you do is you train a model on a small context window, and the context window is the amount of text that you can put into a model. And then you do one specific step to let it reason on large inputs. And then they did 5,000 GPU hours for post-training, which they don't actually explain what it is. So in total, 2.8 roughly million GPU hours. Now, here's the first assumption that they're making that is wrong, because I have not seen this price anywhere. They are assuming that the rental price of the H800 GPU is $2 per GPU hour. Now, the lowest that I've seen is $2.99 on a platform called Lambda. Big shout out to them because they have pretty much built the most cost-effective infrastructure, compute infrastructure cloud out there. But that's also always full. You can't get 2.8 million hours of GPUs from Lambda. On AWS, we're talking more about $12 an hour per GPU, right? Put that aside, right? This is how they came to a figure of $5.5 million, right? Now, here's the thing. $5.5 million is the cost of one training run, right? And now anyone who trains models knows that you don't do one. First of all, you probably do hundreds of smaller ablation training models, and you're finding the method. And this $5.576 million is the cost of the final training run. So once you've figured out all the research and you have a model that looks okay, you say, okay, we do one final, this is like the final version of the model that we're going to train, and you launch that. And so that is the thing that costs $5.5 million. By comparison, who was it? There was there was a case study of a model recently that was a $30 billion model that was trained, and their final run cost $10 million, and that was hailed as cheap, right? So there is an improvement. The improvement comes from some optimizations in training methodology that, quite frankly, like everybody else is already using, but they're not using them all together. So, for example, mixture of experts is literally how the original GPT-4 was trained, right? You had, I think it was 16 experts with 110 billion parameters each. And what happens is, because it's a mixture of experts, you only use one expert at a time. So you're effectively breaking down the model into lots of tiny models, and you only train the part that you need rather than training the whole thing. So, first of all, immediately debunked, no, you cannot replicate DeepSeek for $5.5 million. You probably need more in the order of 400. Second, like, that number is already hard to believe, right? But also, that number is for training V3. Nobody knows how much more training went in to get R1 out of V3. And it's probably a lot, because they use reinforcement learning and they use a bunch of other things. Also, we need to consider the fact that, or at least according to the CEO of Scale AI, DeepSeek have 50,000 GPUs, right? And apparently they have 50,000 H100s, which is a non-restricted version, and that is a $30,000 GPU, right? So we're already talking about $1.5 billion of just infrastructure. Anyway, put all of that aside, what happened in the media is they conflated everything together, and they said, yeah, this Chinese company trained a model that's better than O1 for $5.5 million, which is, you know, jumping to conclusions at an Olympic level. So that's basically the fundamental problem that's crashed the markets, is this misinformation then becoming the headline everywhere, right? And
do we know, sorry to jump in there, I'm intrigued. Do we know where that started, that misinformation? Was it official news sources? Was it social media?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. But I will speculate one thing, right? And that thing that I'm going to speculate, because you know that I sometimes like to wear my tinfoil hat and talk about conspiracies. This one is actually probably easy to buy into, is, let's not forget that the main thing that DeepSeek does is trading. Oh. So if you've got a model that outperforms O1 on benchmarks, and there's actually now some investigation going into, like, how is it actually outperforming O1 on the benchmarks? But let's say you do, because, like, state of the art in machine learning can come from anywhere, and it's great. They actually made some really good improvements, and I'll get into what the actually really good things are. But what's the thing that you do before releasing R1? If you own a trading firm?
Yeah, you influence the market, right?
Well, you short NVIDIA, put on a big short on NVIDIA, release this, and try and coordinate a false narrative that is going to tank that market, at least temporarily. Following day, you get out of the short, you made a couple $2 billion, Bob's your uncle, keep going, right? It's a nice way to make a quick buck. And, like, I'm not actually detracting anything from the model itself. Right? There are some things that are kind of like they're not even dubious, right? They're just an artifact of the fact that this is a Chinese company. So the model has had to have been trained on censored information, right? So the model doesn't know what happened in Tiananmen Square and all those kinds of things, and it will never criticize the CCP. That's fine. That's just a result of it having been trained in China, right? But you can then take any other data set, continue training with more accurate information, and all of a sudden you've made the model better.
Because it's open source, right?
Because it's open source, right? You can download the weights of the model and carry on training, and train it on a data set that corrects those.
Just on that note, what exactly is open source for those that are hearing this? Because I think people have different understandings of what open source actually means.
Well, a lot of people have different opinions about what open source actually is, and there are different definitions, right? But let's go from most closed to most open in this case, right? So most closed is effectively what OpenAI did with O1, which is, we're just going to tell you, here's a model, here's the benchmarks that it beats on everything, and you can use it. But we're not going to tell you how we made it. We're not going to tell you what data we used. You definitely can't download the model. You can just use it through an API, right? That's like the most closed. I guess like if you close it more than that, you can't even use it, right? Which is kind of like what we do, right? We have some models that we use in our products, but nobody else can, right? So I guess we're on the left of that on some things. And then you have, call it the llama version of open source, which is, we're not going to share the source, we're not going to share the training data, but once we've trained the model, you can download the model yourself, right? And if you can download the model yourself, like meaning like the entire set of parameters of the model, you can load it in and continue training or do whatever else you want to do with it, right? And you can use it. You can self-host it for inference. So if you want to use a llama model, you can host it on your own infrastructure. You spin up your own GPUs or whatever else it is that you want to use, and you can use that yourself in your own application. And then you can go further than that. And actually, like Meta, are kind of like a little bit further than what I just said, but you publish the methodology and you write a research paper that explains what you did, and you show the world what you used, right? And then the final step in being open source is you actually completely open up the source code so that people can go and download the source code that you used you wrote for training, and download the data, and replicate what you did exactly, right? And I don't think DeepSeek went that far. We don't know what data was used, especially for R1. But there's a company I have a lot of respect. Like, well, we lost a lot of engineers to them, but it's a company called Hugging Face, and they basically have built the ecosystem for open source machine learning. They've been doing it for, I don't know, close to 10 years. And that's where all the new models get published, by the way. So DeepSeek was published on Hugging Face. But what they've decided to do is they're going to replicate the training pipeline for DeepSeek V3 and R1 and try and reproduce the model using open data sets, right? So that we know what went in, and they're going to publish the whole thing. And they're going to train a smaller version of the model, because actually Hugging Face is not really drowning in money or GPUs. They're the place where everybody publishes their models, but they don't have, OpenAI size budgets.
Hugging Face is great, by the way. I love Hugging Face.
I love Hugging Face. I love Hugging Face so much, despite them stealing our engineers.
For those that haven't heard of it, it's Hugging Face, HUGGINGFACE, as you say it, .co. Go and check it out. It's really cool. You can get some sort of standalones. I think did I get LM Studio from there on my Mac? So, you can download sort of standard.
There's a lot of things, and they are the biggest contributors to open source machine learning.
A lot of free stuff, which is cool.
In terms of like also libraries, APIs, like pretty much everything that we're seeing nowadays in LLMs is thanks to the Transformers library that they wrote so many years ago that people started using on top of PyTorch, which is the low-level machine learning library, but it just enabled so many things. Anyway, back to the story with DeepSeek. Is that the reality? We don't know, right? We don't know what the truth is. First of all, we know what they've said in these papers. We know what the model is like, right? And then there's a fun bit here, which is this model is, if you download the whole thing, I'm going off memory, but I think it's 670 billion parameters, right? So it's a huge model. And what's happened, and this is something that's also very common in machine learning, you start with a huge model that performs extremely well, and then you take a process which is called distillation, which is transfer learning from one model to another into a smaller one, right? And so they distilled onto a llama model, and they distilled onto a Quen model. And Quen is another architecture that was released by, I can't remember who in China released Quen. It's actually one of the large Chinese tech companies. I can't remember which one. And those are just, to begin with, extremely well-performing models, right? But they distilled from R1 onto Quen and Llama to get smaller, usable models into the hands of people that want to just deploy it on their laptop, for example. And so you can now download a distilled version. And again, like what the press did is that they conflated all this together. So now I've read stories where people are saying that for $5.5 million, a Chinese company built a model that is way smaller than O1 and costs nothing to run and outperforms O1. And the reality is that the distilled models perform a lot worse than O1. And it's the big R1 model that performs better. But to run the big R1 model, you need 100 GPUs, right? And so there's a lot of panic selling, right? Because then you put some news like that out, and then all the finance bros bandwagon, right?
So buy. Did you buy then when it went down?
So I'm waiting. And I think the reason why I'm waiting is that, I'm waiting for people to calm down a little bit. And as soon as this calms down, I'm going to buy. Yeah, this is not financial advice. Don't do what I do. I'm great at being a degenerate and losing money, but yeah, I'm
right?
treating it as a panic-driven dip, right? There was another one, I think, in the summer last year, and I bought again, right? And I think possibly the moment when things turn around for Nvidia specifically on the stock price is probably going to be the next earnings call, right? It's going to be the moment that people realize, wait, hang on, actually, why is Nvidia not bankrupt, right? And why have they not lost any sales? And this is the point that I want to get to, right? Where, and sorry, I'm turning this into an enormous monologue. Maybe I should take a breath.
No, I'm loving this. This is great, right? Because it's hot off the press. You clearly know what's going on in the space, and you want to air, what you know and your opinions. I love it. I think the listeners
I've thought a bit about this too much, Dale. I'm realizing now that I ruminated on it too much.
This is your therapy session.
This is my therapy session that I'm doing in public in front of everybody. And on LinkedIn, I've engaged in a lot of conversations calling out the misinformation, but there's just too many, right? There's just too many different variants of misinformation, and there's also just too many people spreading the misinformation because, quite frankly, they don't know what they're talking about and haven't informed themselves, right? Beyond what the previous person spreading misinformation was telling them.
But I do think this is good. Sorry to jump in there because, looking and thinking about it all, I said, regardless of the misinformation or not, and regardless which side of the argument, because there's a debate going on as well, right? Amongst certain people, or not certain people, but online, there's this debate going on. And I think the good thing about it is that it actually is drawing attention to AI and what it means. And so people are now going, well, what's all the fuss about? and starting to learn about, okay, that means this means that, and trying to follow this discussion, this open discussion. And so, in a way, it's allowing people to engage in it. And now, those listening to this episode will go, thank you, Alan, for explaining what is going on here, because now I get it and I can understand it. Whereas previously, a lot of what you just said would probably go straight over people's heads. Certainly would mine, because you're now going in and you're understanding, okay, what does that mean, right? And so you're trying to, and you're actually using large language models to ask it, what does this mean? And so
Yeah, and it should be very easy, right? Like, you dump the paper into Claude or ChatGPT or whatever else, or Gemini, whatever else you want to use. In fact, dump it into DeepSeek and ask it about itself after reading its own paper, right?
Yeah.
And if you do that, you can probably extract a lot of the information that I just distilled out for you, right? It's just that people didn't do that. They just read whatever the previous person posted on X or LinkedIn or wherever, and then just blurbed out some additional opinions.
But you know why, right? Because we explained this, or we discussed this last season, where there's certain people on social media, and because their voices are loud and no one else, and this is a new thing for a lot of people, they're just consuming whoever is the loudest and posting the most, and constantly on their feeds. So I think, and I think this is probably where you're coming from. There's a duty of care here to explain what's going on to everyone, which I think.
I guess. You say duty of care, I say rage. But here we go. I think, well, first of all, if anybody really feels grateful, there's Alan's anti-poverty fund, which you can donate to. There's a GoFundMe page, and it's
stop pretending you don't care. You've lectured before. You're a parent. You got a caring side.
Yeah, of course I care. Of course I care. But if you feel that grateful, pop a $5 in the post. I'm not gonna burn it.
What about Bitcoin? They can send you some Bitcoin, right?
I'll put my address here. Okay.
Sorry,
jokes aside,
I jumped in and interrupted you. Keep going.
No. Jokes aside, there's like a ton of dots to connect still, right? And I think, okay, so here's the exciting part about DeepSeek, and it's something that I'm gonna like go even deeper into the conspiracy with my tinfoil hat, right? But I think it's something that Ilya Sutskever and Sam Altman and a few others already knew. And the key part of the DeepSeek R1 paper is that they used reinforcement learning on its own. Now, one of the key things about training large language models to perform well on complex tasks is that so far we have done variants of what is generally known as reinforcement learning with human feedback. So roughly it goes like this, and there's a lot of variants of it. There's like direct preference optimization, which is a little bit different. But basically you say, hey, model, generate 6 options, 5 options, 10 options, whatever, right? And then you put those options in front of a human, and the human chooses the best one. That now becomes part of the training set. And you keep doing that for new data that you generate, right? And that gets the model to be better at certain things incrementally, right? But you need a lot of humans to do this. And so direct preference optimization is another variant of this, which actually there's like a second model that's kind of helping with the preferences. So you don't always need a human. But what they did with DeepSeek, with R1, is they did it with no humans. They did pure reinforcement learning in the same style that, AlphaGo was built back in the day, right? This is just for the reasoning part, right? So all that chain of thought stuff that O1 does, that's the one I'm talking about. So they use the reinforcement learning on its own, and it's the first time that basically an LLM has been able to learn to do chain of thought through reinforcement learning. and basically implemented reasoning to achieve complex tasks in complex goals and difficult tasks, right? Now, let's rewind to last summer, right? And there was this cryptic tweet about Strawberry, which we now know is O1. And there was a big hoo-ha, you know, Sam Altman got fired, etc., etc. There was like arguments at the board level between Ilya, and there's like a ton of stuff was happening. But amongst all this big cloud of smoke, it emerged that some people at OpenAI were worried about what they were calling Q star, right? Now, nobody knew what it was, but there was a lot of speculation, and one of the core techniques in reinforcement learning, which is actually, you know, rewind back to 2010, is what DeepMind used to train its first Atari playing models, is a technique called deep Q learning. And deep Q learning is reinforcement learning. So this is why I'm saying, I think this is something that everybody, well, not everybody, clearly, because the rest of the community didn't have proof, but it's something that I'm pretty sure OpenAI and maybe some other places already knew, right? If you think about, you know, where DeepMind is now and what their role is within Google, I'm pretty sure that Google knew this. So, you know, probably not a surprise for them. But that, I think, is the thing that in the scientific community, this paper contributes. Because the rest is, yeah, we used a lot of different techniques that kind of worked before. We put them together, we improved them. And then they had a nice engineering trick to get around the restrictions on the H800s, which is basically they went down to the machine code and reprogrammed how the GPU gets used to get around the restrictions in the GPU, right? And the restrictions on the GPU were all about speed or memory bandwidth, which is how fast can you read from memory. And they did some nice tricks around that. And I think that's really clever. It's probably not something that we're going to see a lot of anyway in machine learning research, like trying to squeeze the last milliliter out of a GPU. And that's kind of like the story, right? You've got 100,000 GPUs available. You're going to train a model that needs 10,000. You could spend a month optimizing the code and you only need 7,000 GPUs to train the model. But is it worth the time? Whereas like if you have GPUs that are restricted, then you have no choice, right? And I think it was very clever. No detractions there. And those two things are really impressive. And now, here's my argument for why this should have actually been really great news for NVIDIA. First of all, one, you can build great models even with the restricted GPUs, which means that the whole of the Chinese ML market no longer has a reason to have to develop its own chips. They can just keep buying H800s now, right? And everything that DeepSeek did is open source, so everybody else in China can use their code. And that is great. And it obviously means that NVIDIA is going to sell more GPUs and has less competition. The second and more important thing is that, you know, this is open research and it's a tide rise that lifts all boats, right? If it is true that we can train at what is realistically actually like a 2 to 3x increase in efficiency, that's doesn't huge. All it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And, you know, like people like Sam Altman have been saying for years that the biggest constraint on anything is the number of GPUs that you get your hands on. So anything that constitutes an increase in efficiency is just great news for everybody, right? But again, jumping to conclusions, what the rest of the media concluded is that this means that the $500 billion investment in Stargate is just a waste of money, right? which is actually not true. If you can do things 2 to 3x more efficiently, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think we're going to build the same models but 2 to 3 times smaller, or do you think we're going to build models at the same size that are 2 to 3 times better? Right? And those models being so much better will then actually push the other big trend that's happening now, which is agents, right? And the agents are going to become 2 to 3 times better at doing the things that they're tasked with doing. And if the agents get better, then more people are going to use the agents for more purposes, which then means that the whole ecosystem and the whole market has grown again, right? And there's a lot of debate going on, but effectively it seems to be that there's this divide that anyone who's thought about this and read the papers and thought about it for more than 11 seconds is coming to the same conclusions that I am. And anyone who's just trying to get more clicks on their Medium article or LinkedIn post or their publisher's website is actually pushing the other narrative, right? And the big winner in all of this is obviously DeepSeek right now, because I don't believe for a second that they're not short NVIDIA. Like, you can tell me what you want, but I don't believe it for a second, right? Like, the moment, even if this is not intentional, right? And like, we should not assume ill intent, but you see that your model is producing this type of news, immediately put a short on. Like, that's what you should be doing, right?
Yep.
Especially because, like, you know what you've said to everybody else, and you know what the narrative is that you've put together. So it'll be interesting, right? I think that's like the end of my tinfoil hat sponsored session, I guess.
I love it, and I try to obviously interrupt you as little as possible, because you were in the zone, in the flow there, and I think a lot of people would appreciate the passion and you getting on and sharing it so passionately. I guess there's a few things, and I've spoken to 1 or 2 people as well, and the whole conspiracy. If we leave the conspiracy hats on, and
I like that. Let's go.
Right, if we use DeepSeek, right, China's going to take all of our information, and it's all going to be used by the Chinese government and this and that.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Now, it is true that the data that's been used to train the model is censored, which means that the model censors itself, right? Even if you download it and run it locally. It is also true that if you run DeepSeek, if you call their API, anything that you give to them is being processed in China, which then means that Chinese privacy laws, or lack thereof, are applicable, right? Which basically you can assume that even if DeepSeek don't know about this, somewhere in their data center, there's a CCP sponsored machine that is filtering all the traffic, right? And that is actually probably common for all data centers in China, right? This is nothing specific about DeepSeek. But it's also true, you can just download the model, stick it on your own machine, you run it locally on your computer. You can even unplug it from the internet so that you're sure that nothing is being sent back, right? Like,
that is literally what I said to someone today. so they're like, "Oh, it's sending everything back to China," and I said, "Well, you can download it. It's open source." Like, yeah, but it's still going to send back. I was like, "Well, just don't connect it to the internet."
Yeah, unplug it. It's fine. But like, if we start believing that, and this is the cool part, right? The model weights are published on Hugging Face, and there is no way in hell, like the format that you need to use to publish a model on Hugging Face is pretty predetermined, right? There is no code in the model. There is nothing that could be sending data back to the CCP, because it is literally just the weight, the parameters of the model. It's a long list of 671 billion numbers, right? And the way Hugging Face operates is there's no way that even if there was some form of Trojan horse exploit in the weights of the model, which would be like pretty fantastic Pretty fantastic security engineering, I guess. And I would love to see how they did that if that were true. But like, Hugging Face would immediately pull down the model if that were true, right? And
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that one of the first things that they do with a model is they load it into a sandbox and check what are the network communications that are coming out, right? And so you can do like outside-in testing on that thing. It's pretty easy, right? And you can run it locally on your own machine. You can even put it in your MacBook. You can use the distilled version on your MacBook, I guess, not the 671B, but...
So yeah, I'm on Hugging Face at the moment. 189,425 downloads last month. So yeah, people are downloading it. You know?
Yeah, people are downloading it. A lot of people have spun up alternative APIs. Like Hugging Face has an API with a couple of DeepSeek models. Yeah, there's a bunch of places that have it, right? Like this is like no reason not to try it if you're curious. There's a lot of ways where you don't even go near China. In fact, you can do it without leaving your bedroom, right? So, and I think that's an important consideration, right? Because like we love our conspiracies, and like I'll take another toke, but I honestly don't believe that the guys at DeepSeek are doing anything evil deliberately, right? Other than perhaps putting a short on Nvidia to make some money. They're a really competent group of researchers who have published all their work so far, right? And they're doing it because they love doing it. And obviously there's a lot of financial implications, and if you build a model that's cheaper to run, which is basically what they're angling for, is to be as cheap as possible to run at inference time, then that is a big win, right? Because like inference costs are through the roof for everybody.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm trying to look at all of the various concerns and myths about DeepSeek out there, just sort of reading some of the various comments that have been made. I don't know if this is a myth or not, but it's there's a bit of a thought that DeepSeek is a universal solution for AI applications that can handle any problem perfectly.
I've seen posts where it's been called AGI, and I'm like, just no, get over yourself.
What's AGI? Good point, actually, because
artificial general intelligence. And I'm like, look, I get it. It's exciting that we have models that do chain of thought reasoning, so you can give them just difficult stuff to think about, and they'll come up with answers. And they can plan things for their own work, etc. That's super amazing, right? But the idea of an artificial general intelligence is sort of something that is able to solve any sort of problem, right? Probably not all problems, but any type of problem it should be able to solve. And like, we're far from that, right? And like the definition of AGI is just also a little bit, like, not a little bit, it's very nebulous and very, very ill-defined. But calling DeepSeek or O1 AGI is very premature.
Yeah. How far away are we from AGI, in your opinion?
I mean, the easy definition of AGI, which is, something that is able to plan and do work for itself and work on itself. And I think that is, for me, that is probably the moment where I would accept that it's AGI, is where it is writing new versions of itself on its own. Couple of years.
Wow. I had this discussion with a colleague the other day. I said, if you, i.e. a company or any individual, created AGI, true AGI in that sense, how you just explained it, could you truly own it? Because if you created AGI, because the argument is if you're the first to create AGI, you'll make a ton of money. But then, could you truly own it? Because
we're talking about
Okay.
AGI, right? We're not talking about sentient beings, and the whole definition of sentience is a whole other can of worms that I'm not even willing to unpack, just because what does it even mean for humans, right? So if we can't define it for humans or animals,
Yeah.
why do we think we can do a better job for AIs? But it at least theoretically, right? Like you can make a distinction. AGI doesn't have or can exist without having feelings or a sense of self.
Yeah.
Right? That is very important because it basically is still a language model that's predicting the next token.
Yep.
Right? That hasn't changed, right? It just is predicting the next token so very well and it has built an internal model of how things work that is, cosplaying an artificial general intelligence in a sense, right? Maybe it's not actually the thing. Either way, I think it doesn't matter, right? Because for the purposes that we need AGI, it is literally to just be better at doing things, right? So like speed up medical research, great. Speed up how long it's going to take us to get to nuclear fusion, amazing, right? I don't necessarily care or think we should care about AIs having feelings, because they don't necessarily will. Not a transformer, right? And this is interesting, right? Because like neither should a bag of meat, but there we are, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting one, I think. The I guess the question of ownership was more around commercial ownership than
I have a super interesting thought about that. So, this was, when did we start working on agents? So, the first version of Barry was June 2023, right? That's when we did that AI day.
Yes, the
So
summer
I want
AI
to
day,
say,
I was there.
yeah, and there we were already using planning loops and some of the components that then became agents. We weren't necessarily thinking about agents, but I remember having this conversation, which is probably like the most exciting Nando's I've ever eaten. And I like Nando's, so I find it pretty exciting. But this was like the most exciting Nando's I've ever eaten with my head of research. And we were talking about, well, if models become so good and we can have goal-driven performance of tasks, i.e. agents, we just didn't know what to call them back then we should pretty quickly see the emergence of one-person companies, right? Which is actually starting to happen now, right? You have, in fact, I'll get onto an example of this, which I think is a little bit stupid. VCs love it, but actually a good example of this. Anyway, you would have one-person companies, and the legal framework doesn't allow it. Right? But you could have zero-person companies eventually, right? Easiest thing to think about, and it's probably because also it's part of my past life, is trading firms, right? So there are trading firms right now. I worked at Jane Street. Other trading firms are available where they don't take external investment, never have. They trade their own money. The firm trades its own money. And they don't have clients. They market make, they directly connect to the markets. Set aside the argument of like, what is it that this company is actually doing? But, it's easy to imagine that all you have to do, I'm doing air quotes here, is remove the employees, and then you have a zero-person company, right?
Yep.
But the legal framework says that a company, and this is, in a definition of a company because it was an aggregation of people initially, right, to share risk when shipping, ironically. But a company has owners and an ownership structure. And that's what our legal frameworks say. And I don't think that's going to change, right? So there'll be like owners of these companies and the owner's not doing anything anymore, and the company is just magically producing money by doing things, and you don't even know what it's doing. It's a little bit sinister if you think about it in that way, with like zero supervision and zero accountability. Because, you know, like actually, like I think the first ones that we're going to see are in social media, right?
Yeah.
There's already a proliferation of generated posts. What stops me from creating an agent with 10,000 different fake accounts, and it just posts generated content all the time on those 10,000 fake accounts and starts raking in money?
Yeah.
And then I can walk away and let it do its thing, right?
Yeah, there's so much, and I think I think that's the great thing, that, you know, the likes of your Zuckerbergs have come out with the new administration and have said, we're not governing this stuff anymore. So actually, humans, you should know not to believe everything that's on Facebook anymore, Meta, because we're
True.
not governing it. So that's actually a good thing that he's come out and said it. We know that Musk with X is, I want free speech and everything. So I think more and more people are beginning to question what they're seeing and what they're consuming, which is a good thing. But yeah, there's still the mass market is still consuming far too much fake news, shall we call it?
Yeah, and you know, there's just going to be more and more and more fake content, or like fake generated content, right?
Yes.
And some of it might actually be good, right?
Yeah.
You can generate artificial content for good purposes, right? I mean, if you're running 10,000 fake Instagram accounts to just get money out of people, probably not. But
Yeah,
you know, you could be
exploitation. Where's the lines, right? Where's the laws? But going back to that June 23 AI day, I remember you didn't call it agents, but you call it the version 3 was what I was excited about, but you weren't launching that. You're launching version 1.
Oh
because
yeah,
version
you know,
3 spoke about
one thing at a time.
Yeah, I know. But version 3 said autonomous AI. I remember. It didn't say agents.
Ah, okay. I'm going to go find the slide for that.
I'm pretty sure it said autonomous AI, and I was like, that's the exciting stuff. And then
yeah, and that's really what became agents, right?
Exactly. But here we are. So to recap for the listeners, if you've got this far, thank you for staying with us. We love.
Yeah, it means that you really have nothing better to do.
Enjoy the rock that you're under as well. But no, genuinely, jokes aside. So we don't actually really truly know how much DeepSeek costs because there's no definitive release and evidence thereof. We know it is open source because we can see it. You can go to Hugging Face, you can download it. We've confirmed from our resident tech geek that it does have great tech and the technology is great. And it is not AGI.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's my summation of it all. Anything else, Al? Because I think people are going to love this episode because it just clears a few things for them.
I think, you know, and if you're listening to this podcast, it's probably a moot point, but I'm going to say it anyway, just in case, I don't know, someone decided to listen to the GenAI podcast without actually trying anything. Go try things out, right? Like if you're curious about DeepSeek and if you're worried about China, you can find a provider that's hosting it locally to where you are. There's tons now. Just go test it, try it out, ask it some things, play around, right?
Yeah.
Spend 10 minutes of your day. It's not going to hack your computer. If you feel worried, don't put sensitive information in, right? Just try other things.
Exactly.
But I think the cool thing, this is true of both O1 and R1, is that reasoning models have actually unlocked a new step change in the quality of solving complex tasks. So if you think you tried GPT 3.5 and GPT 4 and it wasn't for you because it couldn't do a bunch of things, go try them again. You'll be surprised.
Absolutely. Can you use it on Hugging Face as well?
Hugging Face. I think DeepSeek is on Hugging Chat, yes.
Yeah. Well, we'll post the links, and you guys can go and check it out.
Yeah.
Hugging Face is well known. So anyway, cool, awesome stuff. Thrilling. I genuinely, I think it's an accelerant again. Things like this is great because
this is another accelerant.
Yeah,
Absolutely right.
And a new one, a better one than Mr. Trump.
Yeah.
But who are we to judge? Look, any final thoughts, Al, before we end the show?
No, I think I've said everything that I had to say. I feel like I've unloaded everything.
Well, folks, thank you for being Al's therapist on the show and listening to him. No, jokes aside, it's been great to be able to record this and share this, because certainly for me, I've learned a lot, Al, just chatting to you there and just listening to you. You're a wealth of knowledge, so really, really appreciate you coming on and sharing this with the audience. I know you do this every episode anyway. I don't know why I'm talking to you like you're a guest, but it felt like you were, and you're just sharing everything you know. So really, really appreciate you doing that on behalf of our listeners. But yeah, from us, thank you. Thank you for spending another 55 minutes with us now on this episode. And hopefully you've taken something from it. So we'll catch up with you on the next one. Bye for now. Take care.
Bye.